Today's episode is sponsored by Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right below this video. There's a super interesting new piece in The Nation written by Sasha Abramsky, which says that there are now even some Republicans worried that indeed Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to retain control regardless of the outcome of the November election, which is now under 8 weeks away. It's 8 weeks minus 1 day. And they're actually using the word coup to describe the possibility of what Donald Trump may do if indeed he loses to Joe Biden on November 3rd. And this article by Sasha Abramsky in The Nation, which we're linking to, and I encourage you to read, quotes Charles Fried. Charles Fried is a Harvard Law School professor, still a Republican as far as I know right now. And Charles Fried is increasingly worried about Donald Trump's electoral strategy of seemingly encouraging chaos and violence, and is even talking about how this strategy is ripe for Donald Trump to actually send in provocateurs into largely left-leaning protests in order to make them seem more violent, in order to try to justify his reelection, or as a sort of double goal, to claim that things are so crazy we can't really be sure the election was done correctly if he doesn't win. And this is a classic authoritarian provocateur strategy. We've seen this the world over. We've seen it for decades and decades. That's Charles Fried. Michael Steele, the former chair of the Republican National Committee. We've talked about him on the program, relatively well-known individual. He is also concerned about the same possibility in November. And the difference would be Michael Steele doesn't so much think that what's going on is primarily authoritarianism, but Michael Steele believes that it's really political opportunism and Trump being determined to retain control from a politically advantageous perspective rather than simply sheer authoritarianism. But the main takeaway and the most important point here is that both Charles Fried and Michael Steele believe that Donald Trump is willing to do whatever he needs to do to remain in the White House. And Trump has been signaling this by attacking vote by mail. He's been saying he knows the election will be rigged. It'll be the worst, the most rigged, most fraudulent election in history. He's said this probably dozens, if not hundreds of times at this point, and has been setting up a situation where he lays the groundwork not to accept the results of the election. And then who knows what happens. Now, what we're seeing is that there are actually Republicans getting together with progressive organizations to develop a specific plan for responding to Trump rejecting the results of the election if he were to lose. And they put together a report. And unfortunately, they are not confident that our institutions will do their jobs. They are saying it could take huge numbers of Americans taking to the streets to make their will be reflected in Donald Trump leaving, if indeed Donald Trump loses the election and claims that it was rigged. And these groups, which again, they now include Republicans. These are not left movements uniquely. Republicans are also concerned. They're also worried that Donald Trump will do something I've been predicting for a long time, which is that if Donald Trump is ahead in certain states on election night, this is the red mirage scenario, Trump will deploy lawyers to file lawsuits in various states to try to stop the counting of absentee ballots, which, if fully counted, could turn a small Trump margin on election night into a small Biden margin and hand Joe Biden the presidency. The Indivisibility Project, Stand Up America are two of these groups. They're bringing together a whole bunch of different organizations to try to have a really specific plan to prevent the electoral process from being undermined and subverted and disenfranchisement from running wild. Now, I still maintain that Donald Trump will not succeed at maintaining power if he loses. I believe that he will go if he loses. But there is the very real possibility that he will try and that he could create absolute and total chaos for some time, including possibly violence on the streets. Ultimately, the way that this becomes dangerous in a physical violence sense is if it's close and Trump wins on election night but starts to say they're trying to take it from me, I need you out there, or loses by a small margin on election night and says it was rigged, I think those two scenarios are the ones that will most likely weaponize. And that's literally what it would be, his supporters with guns to go out on the street. Now, there's another side to this. They are talking about the word coup as if a coup would be necessary. The unfortunate reality is that you don't need a coup to undermine democracy and the will of the people, because the Electoral College has helped Republicans do that in multiple elections over the last several decades. You can combine the disenfranchising nature of the Electoral College with the suppression of the vote and everything else that we're seeing, where you wouldn't even really need a coup. In other words, Trump may be able to pull this off simply with doing enough voter suppression, enough voter purges, etc., that the Electoral College hands him a victory, even when he loses the popular vote, and really should have lost the electoral vote as well. The point is, we have to be ready for this. And it is not merely the stuff of imagination, theory, and fantasy at this point. We've seen the groundwork laid in real time, proclaiming that this election, which could remove Donald Trump, will be the most rigged and fraudulent one in history. And my biggest concern is, what is the Joe Biden campaign doing about it to be ready? What are Democrats doing about this to be ready? Because if they aren't ready, that would be a disaster. They need, I was going to say just as many lawyers. They probably need twice as many lawyers as Trump has ready to try to stop counting absentee ballots. They need twice as many lawyers to ensure that absentee ballots are counted. And it actually could come down to that. It could get very ugly very quickly. I'm not confident that the Biden campaign and the Democratic Party are ready. Why? Because they've been not ready so many other times in history. But they absolutely need a plan. They need the lawyers ready to go. And we're going to be very closely following whether they do have that system in place. There are retirees in Austria and other European countries and other countries around the world who have received U.S. coronavirus stimulus checks for $1,200 or direct deposits, many of whom have not lived in the United States for decades, many of whom do not qualify for such stimulus payments. Only U.S. citizens and U.S. resident aliens are actually eligible for the stimulus money that starts at $1,200 and phases out up to $99,000 in income. And we have all sorts of examples of this from around the world. There's a 24-year-old citizen of the Dominican Republic who last summer worked in Cape Cod and got a $1,200 stimulus check signed by Donald Trump. There's a 73-year-old man from Linz, Austria, beautiful place, who worked as a waiter in the United States for 2 years in the 1960s, who received and was able to cash a stimulus check. His wife, who never worked or lived in the United States, received a $1,200 stimulus check. ORF reports that banks in Austria can confirm that they have cashed dozens of checks for residents of Austria, and it is unclear how many of them received checks without actually qualifying for them, without actually being entitled to them. There are thousands of foreign workers who entered the United States on temporary work visas who received $1,200 checks in error during that first round of stimulus payments. And of course, that money is mostly being spent in their home countries. Our domestic coronavirus stimulus is partially going to foreign countries, which I'm not opposed to in principle, but that was not the point of the plan. 129 countries have received at least one mistaken stimulus check. This includes Brazil, Canada, China, India, Nigeria, South Korea. And there are a bunch of different comments about this that we could make. So let's start sort of at the lowest logistical level. Government officials and tax experts say that the reason for these mistakes include that many foreign workers file tax returns incorrectly in the United States. So if you're a foreign worker, there's a particular way that you are supposed to file your taxes. Often those foreign workers misfile their taxes as if they were U.S. residents when in fact they are merely temporary workers. That could be what led to them receiving a check when they weren't supposed to receive a check. Now, there's a higher level discussion to be had here. And there's actually sort of like two different discussions. One is we have such a convoluted system in the United States from the standpoint of taxation and filing taxes that it is almost inevitable that this sort of stuff would happen. And I know that it might be fun to say, oh, this is Trump's fault. It's really not Trump's fault. What is Trump's fault is the failed response, the fact that he promised a second stimulus. We still don't have it. The fact that we've had 6 months of pandemic and just one $1,200 stimulus check. That's Trump's fault. But a lot of this is just our systems. Now, some on the right will say, wow, David, you sound like you want to simplify the tax code with something like a straight up flat tax. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the systems, including the fact that you have companies like Intuit and these companies that make TurboTax and other tax software constantly lobbying to keep the tax code more complicated. That's a piece of this. We could have a simpler system without going to a system that is unfair, like a flat tax. And then lastly, there is this sort of big picture aggregate economic element to this, which is that of the 1.4 billion in stimulus checks that, for example, went to dead Americans, 30% of that money is still unrecovered as of the latest report. So if you believe in fiscal responsibility and fiscal conservatism, for lack of a better term, this has also been a major failure. Meanwhile, there are some foreigners who do live in the United States and who are married to U.S. citizens who have not received stimulus checks, though by every sensible approximation, they should be entitled to one. And then again, more importantly, where's the second stimulus? We are now 6 months into this. Congress, I think, maybe is just back or about to be back from vacation. No second stimulus. We've got an election coming up. We've still got a raging pandemic. What is going on with that? And that continues to be an unanswered question. But at every level, there are aspects of this that have been completely mishandled. Not all of them are Donald Trump's fault directly, but certainly the situation has not been improved by Donald Trump and Steven Mnuchin and others being at the helm, and money just flying around the world. Some I know in the audience will say, hey, that's maybe a good thing. And sure, I mean, listen, hey, we're supporting different people, I guess. But if we're not even properly supporting Americans, I think there's a very reasonable case to be made that money shouldn't go to Austria, to people who aren't actually entitled to the stimulus money. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you make of it. Yesterday, the David Pakman Show had our best single day ever for audio podcast downloads. I know I've said this like 8 or 10 times in the last few months. It's because the podcast is growing dramatically. Consider yourself invited. If you normally watch on YouTube one clip at a time, but you'd like to have the full hour show all at once, get the show on iTunes, get the show on Spotify, get the show on Pandora, Stitcher, whichever is your favorite podcasting app. Let me know where you are in terms of a second stimulus by letting me know your thoughts on Twitter, where you can find me at @dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month. And you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Sometimes I get hate mail, and when we have that hate mail read by a professional voiceover artist, we call it Patriot mail. Here's a quick reminder about that.
Why don't you take some hydroxychloroquine for that Trump derangement syndrome? Patriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, let's get, there's a lot, I'm warning you. I would get the kids out of the room. There's a lot in this week's Patriot Mail. Take a listen to this.
Parkman, you're the most disingenuous piece of shit on all of YouTube. Go yourself, Davey Parkman, commie, prostitute, and panties. Loser, David Parkman, douche boy, wannabe anti-Catholic, anti-American leftist, cannot tell the difference between 100% mail-in by voter roll and ask for a mail-in ballot vote? My God, how stupid are the leftist dopes. Most damaging interview? What a clown loser this pompous jerk is.
So a lot being said here, and a lot of it is just wrong. You might be surprised to hear, maybe not. I am certainly not a communist. You know, this is one of the funny things. It's actually similar to what's going on with Joe Biden, where with Joe Biden, you have some on the left who are furious that Joe Biden is not a socialist. And then you have much of the right attacking Joe Biden for being a socialist or a Marxist or an anarchist or a communist or whatever the case may be. In that same way, there's a whole contingent of the internet left that doesn't like me. They don't think I am left enough because I am not a socialist. And then at the same time, one of the most common attacks we get from patriots is, you communist, socialist, Marxist David Pakman. The truth is I'm just a social democrat. That's the very boring reality. I'm certainly not anti-Catholic. I'm not anti-American. But what the Patriot does get right is that I am an American leftist. That's true. And this is a Trump voter. And, you know, I keep getting calls from people saying, how can I convince my Trump supporting friend, my Trump supporting cousin, my Trump supporting parents to vote for Joe Biden? I don't believe you can. That Patriot mail is from a devout Trumpist. There is no point in arguing with them and trying to convince them with 8 weeks minus a few days to go before the election to change their vote. They don't care about facts. They don't care about logic. Just get the vote out from people who are on our side. We are better off. We are more likely to have an impact. It is far easier to convince people who already agree with us that they should vote than it is to argue with someone like that and say, no, you're wrong about Trump. You should vote for Biden. It's an exercise in futility. It's an exercise in frustration. What's not an exercise in futility is using the coupon code Patriot40 whenever you sign up at joinpakman.com. You will save 40% off of the membership of your choice with the coupon code Patriot40. And when that code is used, I have it on good authority that Patriots cry. They can't handle it. Joinpakman.com, coupon code Patriot40. The president is continuing these Corona rallies, large crowds, very few masks, no social distancing, certainly no coronavirus tests. The latest one was at Winston-Salem, North Carolina's airport. Airport rallies now are something Trump is doing so he can just fly in, get off the plane and do the rally, and then fly back out. And this stuff really matters from the standpoint of the virus. On the bonus show today, we're going to talk about a new study which suggests that 250,000 coronavirus cases, a significant portion of all August coronavirus cases, were spread by the Sturgis motorcycle rally in South Dakota. I believe it's South Dakota, not South Dakota. So these events have a real world impact. Let's look at some of the moments from yesterday's very, very much unhinged rally. Donald Trump started the rally by actually bragging about how many people there were. Again, during a pandemic, no social distancing, very few masks. Trump bragging about it.
We said, let's keep it down. They didn't do too good a job, but that's good, right? That's good. Now these crowds, I tell you, it's beyond what we had in terms of enthusiasm, beyond what we had 4 years ago in 2016. And that was a record enthusiasm, and we are breaking that record by a lot. This is the most important election we've ever had.
And speaking of which, by the way, at this rally where there are barely any masks, people are packed together, you really shouldn't have more than 10 people in a crowd, and there are thousands. Donald Trump attacks Nancy Pelosi because she went to a salon without wearing a mask.
Nancy Pelosi with her hairdryer and the whole thing. Everybody has to wear a mask. You must keep all beauty parlors closed. Then she's in a beauty parlor with no mask. Oh. And then she said the biggest, she could have said, okay. She would have said, you got me. But she said, I got set up by the beauty parlor owner, who happens to be a Trump person, by the way. I like the beauty parlor person. She said, I got set up by the owner of the beauty parlor. Now she set me up. I say, how are you going to do with Putin, Kim Jong-un, and President Xi of China? No, it's terrible. She's always preaching about the mask. You got to wear the mask at all times, indoor, outdoor. When you go to bed at night, put the mask on. I've spent the last 4 years keeping my promises.
Now, what Nancy Pelosi did was stupid. I've already said, when these are the rules in California, you're not supposed to have salons open. She has the money to have someone come to her house. But who is Trump to be criticizing her for not wearing a mask when he's holding a rally in the middle of a pandemic where people are crushed together? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. This is the president of the United States speaking, by the way. This is the embarrassment is not just what he is saying. It's that this is the president and this is how they speak. Then Trump went into his performative mispronunciations of Kamala Harris's name. And he starts, it's almost like some kind of Gregorian chanting that Donald Trump starts. Take a look at this.
By the way, you know who's further left than crazy Bernie? Kamala.
I'm not completely sure, but I'm erring on the side of this probably being xenophobic in some way. Do you guys agree, disagree? I'm not sure. Then Donald Trump went into the victim complex, and this is just so out of touch. One of the most powerful men in the world, the height of privilege, the epitome of wealth. Donald Trump again doing the victim complex, saying that he has been treated even worse than Abraham Lincoln by the press. This is really weird. Take a look.
And actually, if we weren't interrupted with constant investigations that went nowhere, and nobody has been through what I've been through as president of the United States, nobody. You know, they used to say Abraham Lincoln got the worst press. I said, there's no way he got worse than me. But Lincoln was very, very badly treated by the fake news. Maybe in his case it was real. I can tell you in my case it's fake. It's totally fake. But nobody's been, and it should never be allowed to happen again. Let's see what happens. We caught him cold. Let's see what happens. But if we didn't have to, that takes time and energy and all of the things, the time that we spent on this impeachment hoax.
This is kind of like Trump's, I did more for black people than anyone except maybe Lincoln. Now he's been treated worse than any president except maybe Abraham Lincoln, or maybe actually worse than Abraham Lincoln. Absolutely and completely bizarre. And then Donald Trump took this sort of victim complex and smoothly as smoothly as Donald Trump can transition when alternating between reading a teleprompter and ranting, he transitioned into suggesting that his supporters sign up to be poll watchers on Election Day. And he warned the crowd about the stealing and the robbing and the thieving that he expects to see at polling places. I guess Trump is warning the crowd about pickpocketing at polling places. Take a look.
Look at these crowds, and if they're going to cheat, crowds are meaningless. Really, if they're going to cheat, these big, beautiful crowds, you could have 15,000, you could have 50,000. These crowds are meaningless. Watch it. Be poll watchers when you go there. Watch all the thieving and stealing and robbing they do. Because this is important. We win North Carolina, we're going to win Florida. I just left Florida. We're going to win Florida.
I have to tell you, I didn't think that polling places were unsafe places. It's an interesting idea, but it's not much like we don't hear much about in-person voter fraud because it essentially doesn't exist. I've never even heard about theft, burglary, pickpocketing, and thieving at polling places, unless Donald Trump is, of course, getting back to this idea of a rigged election, which he probably is. And then hear Donald Trump waxing philosophical to the extent that he can, imagining 1,000 years into the future that his wall, which hasn't been built, will still be seen as a marvel of human innovation. Take a look.
Two things, if you come back in 1,000 years, 2,000 years, or 3,000 years, if you're lucky enough, assuming we have something with the world is a crazy place, isn't it? But if you come back in 1,000 years, there are two things with all the computers and all the everything changes every day. You invent a new cell. You invent a new laptop. Everything is obsolete, like about 2 weeks after you invent it, right? Two things that will never get obsolete. The wall and the wheel, right? A wheel?
The wheel Trump has nothing to do with. The wall isn't being built. And no, I don't think that 1,000 years from now, we will still think of a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, if it exists, as some kind of timeless marvel or the vanguard of human technology and innovation. You know, we humans are notoriously bad at predicting the future. Humans are notoriously bad at making economic predictions. But I feel pretty confident that if a wall is built between the U.S. and Mexico in 1,000 years, it will not be a notable technological innovation at the time. Then Trump just starts making things up about the wall, again, going back to Mexico is going to pay for the wall. You might not get how, but Trump is insisting Mexico will pay for the wall.
And you know, Mexico is paying for the wall, just so you understand. They don't say that. They never say it. But we're going to charge a small fee at the border. You know, the toll booths. We have toll booths. It's the biggest border in the world in terms of people going across and in terms of industry. Believe it or not, the southern border. We're putting a small toll on, and maybe we're going to do something with remittance. That's where people come here, make money, and they send it back. So we'll do something, and we're going to get all the money that we spent in the wall will be coming back. So remember I used to say, who's going to pay for it? They'd say Mexico. Right, that's right. That's right. Mexico's going to.
The fact that Trump says this is wild. The fact that a crowd cheers for it is even more outrageous. There is not going to be a toll. It's just not going to happen. Mexico is not paying for the wall, and there is no wall. There is no wall. Donald Trump promising. So Trump has under 8 weeks left to accomplish the promise of a wall across the entire border during his first term. 8 weeks. Something like 250 miles of wall have been replaced. That's what's happened. I don't think he's going to make it. Then Trump again brings up this very dystopian idea of patriotic education. This is really wacky stuff.
You see what's going on. We will restore patriotic education to our schools. Oh, you know what I'm talking about. Look at you. This is a very sophisticated group, Tom. You know what I'm talking about, patriotic education. Well, the first thing they do is they want to take your history away.
We really don't know what that is, and Donald Trump has been talking about restoring patriotic education for a while now in schools. And what we gather is that Trump wants to correct what he believes are lies about racism and slavery, I guess, that he claims are being told in schools. He wants to correct that. This is his term, not mine, with what he says would be patriotic education. It's out of this world cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. That's the reality. And then maybe getting down to the sort of wind down of, again, like a 70-minute speech, the crowd visibly bored, people on their phones, just going on way too long. Donald Trump is painting a picture pre-coronavirus of an America that had fixed its partisan division. Donald Trump acting as if his leadership and his successes prior to coronavirus were so out of this world that they had brought together left and right, when in reality, he was impeached and partisan divisions were worse than ever. Take a look at this.
And you know what? After we get in, we're going to have tremendous success. And it was building. We were at a point, we were so successful before the plague came in from China. We were so successful that we were starting to get together. People forget. We were starting, success brings people together. It was so good. Our jobs numbers were so good. And whether it was the black community, the Hispanic community, the Asian community, our jobs were so good. Our numbers were so good.
This was one of the least popular presidents ever historically. In the Gallup tracking poll, approval tracking poll, Trump never got to 50% approval even one day of his presidency. And in fact, his election spurred some of the largest protests in the United States in a long time, generating more protesters than we have seen in a very, very long time. And importantly, Trump lost the popular vote. 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton than the number that voted for Donald Trump. And Trump is framing himself as having bridged the political divide up until the coronavirus hit. Fantasy world, irresponsible to do the rally, outrageous that we have a president who speaks like this. The world is laughing at us. And yet, he may get 4 more years. He may get 4 more years, and we're going to know very soon. Continued coverage of yesterday's rally will be on our Instagram page, David Pakman Show on Instagram. Make sure you're following us there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program after too long of a hiatus, Scott Barry Kaufman, who's a humanistic psychologist exploring the depths of human potential. He's author of the book Transcend, The New Science of Self-actualization. It's great to have you back on.
Thanks. It's great to talk to you again. That was a fun one last time.
So let's, I have a feeling this one will also be. So 2 words in the title of your book, which we should just directly get into because they can mean different things to different people. Transcendence, first of all, and self-actualization. What do you mean in your use of those words? What is self-actualization and what are we looking to transcend?
2 woo-woo words, right?
Right.
And here I am. I'm a scientist. You know, I think there's, I just want to start off with that, say I think there can be a lot of wisdom in the woo-woo, but I've been trying to scientifically put this on a foundation that's grounded in as much evidence as possible. So Abraham Maslow, the humanistic psychologist, who really was a big inspiration for me in writing this book, viewed self-actualization as whatever that unique part of you that really makes you come alive, that makes you creative, that really shows the world and that you truly existed, you know, when you were here on this planet. Transcendence, which is something that Maslow, towards the later years of his life, really felt was missing from his hierarchy of needs. He saw it as a great connectedness to others, having being at one with your values, but these what he called the B values, the values of being itself. So values which are no longer means to another end. You know, you've transcended having values that are perhaps selfishly oriented, but really get outside of yourself.
Is your sense that as you have worked in this field now for some time, and you, of course, are familiar with the history of it and where the field is now, is your sense that there will ever really be an achievement of what a lot of these processes point to, or is it more this idea that the journey really is the process and there is no endpoint at which we say Self-actualization has now happened and we're done. Transcendence has happened and we're done.
Oh gosh, what a boring life that would be if you reach transcendence and then you were done.
Right.
Watch Netflix, binge watch Cobra Kai the rest of your life or
I
something?
guess. Yeah.
No, I'm all about the process, really. And I actually define the process of becoming a whole person a never-ending process. It's a process of integration. There's constantly things we have to integrate. We are integrating various warring factions within ourselves, but it's a never-ending process integrating warring factions outside of ourselves as well. I mean, we have various viewpoints, and other people have various viewpoints, and these days everyone wants to rip their head off. That having this sense of a North Star of self-actualization, or having a North Star of transcendence, means that you're always moving towards. It's like, you're never gonna. You can see the moon. You can try to walk towards the moon. You're never gonna walk to the moon. I mean, maybe someday we'll be able to get to the moon, by other means. But just having that self-actualization or transcendence as this moon that you always see in front of you and that you're working towards, I think is a great North Star to have. But it doesn't make any sense that you're going to actually achieve it.
One of the things that's common in philosophy and, reading the theory of different philosophers, this doesn't apply to all, but it applies to many. It's the idea that a particular philosophical approach to life is almost like a grand theory, in the sense that it is the explanation for how things came to be the way they are, or how humans should interact with the world, or it purports to be a sort of self-contained package that tells you not everything you need to know in a literal sense, but in terms of an approach to living, covers a lot of the ground. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have a sort of different approach, that there is no such one prescription, so to speak.
That's right. I mean, I cringe, quite frankly, when I see a lot of things in the self-development space, and I cringe for one reason: they're so out of touch with science and the actual evidence. You might have some hyper narcissistic gurus or something who or people who are trying to sell a product who, because they thought of it, then they're like, oh, it's brilliant. but the way science works is that I had so many ideas in grad school, for instance, that I woke up in the middle of the night, I'm brilliant, it's brilliant, and I presented it to my advisor and I got a reality check. It was like, actually, that's doesn't make any damn sense. So being a scientist means you need that humility, right? And so I think that the best way forward is to understand that there are individual differences. I've studied personality science, and you realize that people are on different paths of self-actualization. We need to be as accepting as we can of other people's, this might sound a little woo-woo, but sacred journey. There's a sacred aspect to each person. That's what Maslow was trying to get at with self-actualization. He said, we don't try to change roses into lilies. We try to make a rose into a good rose. And, I think that's really the philosophy behind this, is that you need to find out what works for you. You need to find out what path fits your unique constitution, your unique talents, your unique strengths, your unique personality. What you see these days is there are a lot of people who are trying to tell other people how they should live their life. And it's really truly unfortunate.
I want to get to how much of this is about the individual, but how much of it is the context in which the individual lives, meaning society on planet Earth at a particular point in time. But to open that conversation, we hear a lot about, social media makes people less happy because you're constantly comparing your life to the lives of others. Technology, shorter attentions, there's this idea that things are really bad right now in terms of happiness because of particular characteristics about society today. How would you answer the question of whether people on balance are less happy today than they were at some point in the past?
Well, if you look at every generation, no one is ever happy. In the history of the human species, there's always been, there's been obviously prosperous times, and there's been droughts, there's been horrible times. Right now, we're going through a historic moment right now, which 500 years from now they'll probably talk about as a really difficult time. But it is part of human nature to never be content, to never be satisfied, to always strive for more, to always be unsatisfied with the attainment of our basic needs. Now, there are few people who really can cultivate a really deep mindfulness practice, who cultivate a really a practice where they're seeking wisdom, and the wisdom they are seeking is that enoughness, But I do think it's part of human nature. Every generation, you have people complaining. It's not like it's that unique. There's some people had argued that this is the narcissistic generation. But then there's some criticism that came out. Well, actually, every generation of it's just kids are narcissistic. Like unless you eradicate from the gene pool, youth, you're not going to eradicate narcissism to a large degree. There's certain things that are reoccurring because they're part of human nature.
What do you make of the, not what do you make of, but how should the average person who's trying to figure out their path deal with the very present conflicts that exist between different philosophies and ideas? So just like one example, the mindfulness movement has become very en vogue over the last 10 to 15 years. And meditation as part of the path to self-actualization and transcendence is something that many people are talking about. On the other hand, if you look at the ancient Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and others, they are not so big necessarily on meditation in the sense of clearing the mind and sort of focusing on breathing and the like. And they have a different approach about sort of the practical steps that someone might take to solve some of the issues that we might look to meditation for help with. It seems to be sort of a conflict, at least to some degree. How can the average person navigate, with that as one example, and of course hundreds of others, the conflicts between these different ideas about how to live presently and transcend, for lack of a better term?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it goes back to your earlier question about is there one way to live a good life? I taught at Columbia. I taught this course, The Science of Living Well, and I had a whole history lecture where I go through in depth different conceptualizations of what the good life entails throughout the course of human history. And my goal for my students is to see what resonates with them the most. I mean, you have the Ryan Holidays. I love that guy. I talk. He's been on my podcast a lot of times, and he's gung ho about the Stoics, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone has to be as gung ho about the Stoics. Some people might resonate more with some of the things the Buddha said. Some people might resonate more with what David Pakman says. You really have to open up the space that no one discovered the ultimate truth that works for everyone in all of humanity. No one. The Stoics didn't, certainly. Now, what could be an interesting question is which philosophy is closest to the science, is closest to actually what the science shows is most likely to lead to a good life. That's a reasonable question.
And what's the answer to that one?
Oh boy, I've never answered that in public before, because I'm very wary of in some sort of fight saying there's the winner, bing bing bing. But I think that the science shows that there are grains of truth in all of them. I know that might sound like a bit of a cop-out answer, but
it does.
It does. I know, right? But you have to mix and match. So if I was, well, actually, that's what I tried to do in my book Transcend. To be honest, is I didn't pit it to a particular ancient philosophy. I tried to present a integrated framework of what all the science looks like. So my preferred approach is science. My preferred approach is to take what we know about science and put together into an integrated scientific framework, as opposed to a philosophical framework that's untested. Now, that might be fighting words to some philosophers, but I'm not a philosopher. I'm a psychologist.
There are people who will no doubt listen to this conversation and they'll say, guys, you're missing the boat. This is not about Maslow. This is not about Stoicism. There is no way that anybody can really self-actualize and transcend unless we deal with the structural problems in society. When we have, some people might point to neoliberalism, others will point to capitalism, some will point to the military industrial complex or inequality, and they will say, what you're doing is like a retail strategy, but unless you do the wholesale first, you're not going to get there. What would you say to that argument?
Well, I think it's funny that you use the word boat, because that's my new hierarchy of needs metaphor, is a sailboat. So I very much take into account and appreciate the fact that we can't have too many holes in our boat, or we can't have too much insecurity or too much stressors on the boat itself, or else we're not going to go anywhere. But I also try to point to the fact that we must not neglect our higher possibilities either. So this is very much in the spirit of what Maslow talked about, and I'm really trying to bring back a lot of these ideas and make the argument that we need to work on both. We need to work on security, and we also need to work on growth. If you get too stuck in talking about insecurity and safe spaces and systemic all these things, which are fair enough, but if we talk too much about it, we can start to neglect and forget that there's still beauty in the world. We can start to forget that there's still opportunities, no matter how dire your current circumstances are. There are still opportunities for meaning making. There are opportunities for connection. In fact, if you get too caught up in what Maslow called the deficiency realm of human existence and neglect the be realm, or the being realm, the growth realm, you actually start neglecting all these amazing opportunities for connection that may exist because you're so focused on grievances.
Let's pause our conversation with Scott Barry Kaufman there. We will have the full conversation in its total glory on the David Pakman Show YouTube channel, youtube.com/The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There is a new poll of Ohio voters done by the right-leaning Rasmussen reports, which has Donald Trump losing by 4 points to Joe Biden, 49-45. And this is a really important poll for a few different reasons. First of all is Ohio. Ohio is of such importance to Republicans. And in fact, a Republican presidential candidate has not won the Electoral College without winning Ohio, dating back decades. You have to go at least to the 70s, and I didn't go back any further than that. So Republicans need Ohio historically in order to win. Even more so than, I would even say, Florida. Ohio is one of those states where if Trump does not win Ohio, it could be a very, very bad election for Donald Trump. This is also an important poll because it's a Rasmussen poll, and Rasmussen polls tend to lean right. If even a Rasmussen poll says Trump is losing Ohio by 4, that could also be very bad for Trump. However, you might say this is only one poll. Donald Trump certainly is still winning Ohio overall, right? Not so fast. In fact, in the Real Clear Politics average of recent polling, Joe Biden is up by 2.4 on average right now in Ohio. That includes an Ohio Media Collaborative poll from 6 weeks ago, which had Joe Biden winning. There's a poll between that one and the Rasmussen poll, which has Donald Trump up by 1. So it is certainly true that there's not as much polling data out of Ohio as there is from some other states. It is absolutely a fact that we should not get cocky or arrogant in any way. But this is much like, when we look at Donald Trump being up by only 2 in Texas, according to the recent Dallas Morning News poll. When you look at the numbers out of places like Arizona, these are signals about how the election could go if we vote. That's all it is. When I see a poll, I see it as an opportunity. And it actually would make a lot of sense if Ohio went to Joe Biden. It would make sense because Ohio has been absolutely ravaged by Donald Trump's tariffs on China, which I know you all understand this. Trump doesn't seem to. When you place tariffs on Chinese products, American businesses importing those products pay the tariffs. It's not the Chinese who pay the tariffs. When you're in manufacturing, when you're in farming and you're dealing with counter tariffs from China, Ohio is a place that would be very much affected by Donald Trump's disastrous trade policy. The point here is every state has to be involved. We're going to deal with this in today's voicemail. In fact, I'm continuing to experience worry that some people aren't getting the importance of every state being involved here. But think about it this way. If Donald Trump is really up by only 2 in Texas, make him fight for the win. Make him spend money in Texas that he won't have other places. We talked yesterday about how Donald Trump has already spent 73% of the $1.1 billion that he's raised since the start of 2019. Trump is in a cash crunch. Trump is struggling to continue running ads in all of the states in which he should be running ads. Make him spend money to defend Texas. If Florida is tied, or Biden's up a little in Florida, or Trump is up a little in Florida, the point is Florida is in play, and any money that Trump spends in Florida is money he cannot spend in Ohio. That's good for Joe Biden. The whole point here is we have to run up the score in every state while simultaneously keeping the pressure up so Trump actually has to fight for states that in past elections Republicans didn't have to put any money into. That would have been easy wins for Republicans. That's the way to do it. One other great example of this is Arizona. Arizona has been a red state for a long time and in presidential elections. And on average, Joe Biden is currently winning by 5, including winning by 9 in Arizona in a recent Fox News poll. Martha McSally, the Republican incumbent senator in Arizona, is down by as much as 17 to Democratic Senate challenger Mark Kelly. It tells us nothing other than the state is in play and it's worth fighting for, if only to make Donald Trump himself have to fight for it. That in itself helps Joe Biden. Let's keep it going. We're down to just 7+ weeks remaining here. We're going to keep the pressure up. We need you to keep the pressure up as well. We had a fascinating interview last night on Rachel Maddow's program with Donald Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen. Now, I don't really watch MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News other than services that will sort of clip notable things for me that I might want to talk about on the program. I haven't seen Rachel Maddow's show in years. I think the last time I saw it was when she had that episode about, we have Trump's taxes, but it was like a 15-year-old page 1 of a 1040 or something like that. Last night's interview that Rachel Maddow did with Michael Cohen is fascinating. And there's a ton of great material in the interview. I encourage you to check out the entire interview if it's interesting to you. But I want to focus in on one thing today, which is Michael Cohen predicted yesterday something we've been talking about for a while. By we, I mean, with the audience, it's been in the ether for a while, which is the idea that if Donald Trump loses to Joe Biden in November, sometime between November and January 20th, Donald Trump will resign in order to make Mike Pence president, in order for Mike Pence to preemptively issue a blanket pardon for Donald Trump. We've been talking about this for a while. Callers regularly ask about it and suggest it. Here is Michael Cohen saying he believes that that is exactly what Donald Trump will do if he loses to Joe Biden in November.
But you say at the very end of the book that the president and Attorney General William Barr ousted the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York and tried to install effectively the president's golfing buddy as the new U.S. attorney there because the president, in your view, wanted to arrange for himself to be indicted while he's still in office, because that would give him the opportunity to pardon himself after he lost the election. I just wanted to make sure that I understand the point that you're making there. Just ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, because I'm not sure I understand.
My theory is that if he loses, there's still the time between the election and the time that the next president would take office. And during that time, my suspicion is that he will resign as president. He will allow Mike Pence to take over, and he will then go ahead and have Mike Pence pardon him. And it's a very, let's just say, it's a very Nixon type of event. And it was probably discussed between Roger Stone and President Trump at some point, that this is certainly one way to avoid any potential prison time.
So there's a few thoughts here. There's actually a big legal question here. And often we hear this kind of flat conventional wisdom that pardons apply only to federal prosecution. Presidential pardons apply only to federal prosecution, but not to state prosecutions. And that as such, Mike Pence can't protect Donald Trump from state prosecution. The counter argument is that some believe a blanket preemptive pardon would cover state prosecutions. The counter to that would be, well, there was the idea that that was the case with the Richard Nixon pardons, but it was never actually challenged in court because charges were not actually brought. So we don't really know. There really isn't judicial precedent in terms of the legality or the reality of a preemptive pardon. Does it cover potential state charges or does it not? It's a debate is the point. The other important counter or factor is when we talk about Richard Nixon's crimes, they were much narrower in scope than all of the different stuff that Trump has been colloquially accused of. And they really only took place when Nixon was president. With Donald Trump, we're talking about myriad crimes, including crimes allegedly committed before Donald Trump became president anyway. And the idea would be, preemptive pardon or not, it's going to be much more difficult for Mike Pence to preemptively get Trump out of trouble definitively. That's sort of one aspect of this. The other important aspect of this entire discussion is that clearly the time between Election Day and Inauguration Day could be very dangerous if Donald Trump does lose. Now, that I have been saying for a long time and warning people about. And we need to account for that in thinking about how durable are our institutions, how prepared is Joe Biden and the Democratic Party and all other aspects of this country to deal with what might be armed Trump supporters in the streets between November 3rd and January 20th if Trump loses and convinces his followers that this thing was rigged. The most important thing here is Trump would rather just win than to have to deal with even this idea of, should I resign and Pence pardoning me? So because Trump would rather just win, he's going to do anything he can think of to win fairly or unfairly. And yes, our blood should be boiling about what's going on. And yes, Donald Trump must be at least somewhat scared of what might happen if he does lose. But he is going to try to solve a personal problem by disenfranchising you. That's where the Postal Service stuff comes from. That's where delegitimizing the trustworthiness of the election is coming from. That's where all of this is coming from. So bottom line, I can't see Donald Trump simply accepting defeat. I don't imagine that if Biden wins, I was looking at one scenario where Biden gets 289 electoral. I can't imagine that with Biden at 289, Trump just says, I concede. Thanks, guys. I lost. I think in the event of a Biden landslide, Trump will come up with something to say. He's going to start writing executive orders, declaring the results suspect and trying to postpone a transition. I don't know. He's at least going to say something about it. If it's close, he will do everything he can to use lawyers to stop the counting of absentee ballots. He's going to try something. I believe he will eventually go if he loses, but he's going to try something, and we have to make sure that we are prepared for it. As I said earlier, I don't know if Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are prepared for it. I hope they are. We have a voicemail number, which you can call anytime. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is yet another caller who I fear may be understating the importance of voting if you're in a very blue or very red state. Take a listen.
Hey, David, I have a quick question. I myself am from New York State,
Yeah.
and on the subject of voting, I'm wondering, those who know that their county or state or district or whatever is going to go blue,
Right.
kind of, regardless of the individual vote, what would you say to people like myself and others that might not necessarily think that it's worth going to the effort to vote by mail or just to vote at all?
Yeah, so I would tell you are very, very wrong. This election in particular is a crucial election in which we have to run up the score. By that, I mean, We need votes for Biden in blue states that Biden will win easily. And we need votes for Biden in red states that Biden will very much lose. Because the larger the margin, the more difficult it will be for a court to give anything to Trump if he tries to challenge the results in one state, nationally, whatever. It's never been more important to vote than this year, regardless of what's happening in your state. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We will talk about coronavirus and the Sturgis motorcycle rally. It's not just USPS, it's also FedEx deliveries that are delayed. I'll tell you why. And my Tesla stock down 21% in one day. What the hell happened? Did I sell any in advance? I will give you the full rundown on today's bonus show. Don't miss it. Become a member at joinpakman.com to get instant access to the bonus show. Thanks so much for watching today's full episode of the show. Just a reminder, today's sponsor is Blinkist, the app that lets you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try Blinkist for free and save 25% off of a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've also included the link right underneath this video.